My husband and I just celebrated our fifth wedding anniversary, and I thought today I'll share with you my 5 realizations after being married for 5 years. Now, if this is your first time to the channel, hello, welcome. My name is Arlene. I'm a Filipina, and my husband is American, and we are living here in the beautiful state of Washington. To the married ones watching this video, please share your realizations or the lessons you learned from your marriage in the comments section below. Number one, I realized that it's not 100% guaranteed that whatever practice or technique or advice that worked with other couple would also work in your own marriage. You have probably heard from other successful couples saying that the reason why their marriage is successful is because they never go to bed with unresolved issue. Well, for my husband and I, it's not really the case. It's so funny because I was the one who brought this up to my husband prior to getting married. But guess what? I realized that if you are at the height of your emotions, it's really better to distance yourself from your spouse and revisit the issue when you already have an open mind or you're already willing to listen on his perspective. And I realized sometimes things are blown out of proportion. It's because you are stressed or not having enough sleep. So you need to get that sleep first before you can think straight. In the past 5 years that I have been married to my husband, there have been a lot of instances wherein, like at the moment, I was like, oh my gosh, how could you do this to me? I can't believe it. Like, I'm so angry. But you know what? After a good night's sleep, when I woke up in the morning, guess what? Those thoughts, those negative thoughts are no longer there. So after all, I just needed that good night's sleep to think straight and to examine if I was in the right to feel that way. And also the important thing to note here is that after you get that sleep is you talk to your husband and sit down what caused the issue. And sometimes after a good night's sleep, you were just gonna be laughing because it could be that both of you were just under a lot of stress, especially if you just have a baby. You know, if you're sleep deprived, it's easy to get things blown out of proportion. Right. My second realization is that my husband was right when he suggested that we should never share our marital business to anybody outside our marriage, and that includes our own parents. This is because the people outside your marriage don't really know about your marriage. They would only know whatever you share to that person. So, what can you expect? The advice or the opinion that they're gonna give you would not really address the issue on your marriage, because if there's anybody who can address the issue, it's you or your husband. And sometimes, even these people outside your marriage are coming at the place where they want the best for you. Sometimes they don't know it, but they are actually doing you harm than good. Some would probably say, Arlene, what about marriage counselors? They have saved a lot of marriages. Do they really? Maybe you would say that, yeah, the marriage was saved because they're still together. What if either of the party was just there to put up with the other party? They're no longer really happy with the relationship. Yeah, in the eyes of everybody, the marriage is intact, but you don't really know if the love is still there, the intimacy is still there, the husband and wife dynamic. My husband and I believe that the moment you turn to a third party to save the marriage has already been long gone. And here's an interesting fact, and I just learned this after I got here in America, and it has been reinforced after living here for 5 years and after hearing these stories. And that is, the government and these marriage counselors are women leaning. Like, they always tend to side with the woman. That is why communication and frequent visits with your spouse is really important. I know it's a challenge for some Filipinas to be forthcoming. So if your wife is more of a reserved kind or somebody who doesn't know how to like really express herself, because one, it could be language barrier, that you encourage her to express herself more by not laughing at her if she mispronounced a word or express her thought in an awkward way, because Filipinos, we tend to translate word for word. Also, nowadays, I don't think this should be an issue anymore because AIs are very effective now. Like they're so good now in translating Visayan or Tagalog to English. If you don't have access to paid service like ChatGPT, Google is free and it's actually good as well in translating Visayan or Tagalog to English. Right, moving on. My third realization is that your spouse plays a big role or influence in your growth. After being married for 5 years, I would say that I am radically a different person and I have learned a lot. And this is largely because my husband himself is somebody who always want to learn. Like he's always learning. I remember when we first got married, he would always tell me, "Why are you always on Facebook? There's a lot of things you can spend your time on other than, scrolling and minding other people's business. Why are you watching that kind of show on YouTube? How about you listen to this kind of podcast?" He's the kind of person who always seeks to further his mind. And he is also the kind of person that doesn't really like an intellectually stimulating conversation. So, what do you expect? After living with him for 5 years, of course, I have adopted that behavior, that trait. So that's why it is really important to choose your spouse well, because after all, you are the company you keep. If you're curious of what are the things that I have learned after living here in America for 5 years, check out the video in the description box or up here. All right, let's go to my fourth realization, and that is you would be surprised of the things that you would be willing to do for the person that you love. When you truly care for the person or when you genuinely love your spouse, sometimes you would be willing to bend your rules, especially for intercultural marriages. Because of the difference in culture, sometimes it's difficult to see eye to eye with your spouse. And it is during those moments when you disagree with your spouse that you really need to communicate and sit down, have an open dialogue, and talk about the issue pragmatically. And my fifth realization is that life is so much better with a spouse. And of course, granting you picked a good one. I know there's a lot of people nowadays who lost faith on marriage or are no longer recommending people to have kids. But you know what? After having been married for 5 years and after having two kids, I tell you, marriage is still worth it. Life is more meaningful and fulfilling. When you have a spouse, and especially if that spouse is also working, you always have that safety net. I remember back in the Philippines when I was still single, there were times when I don't feel like working anymore, but I was forced to keep on working because there's nobody who could support me or could support my family because back then I was the breadwinner. And when that similar feeling came to me when I was working here in the US, my husband said, "Quit. We are okay with my income alone." And of course, being a responsible spouse myself, I did not quit my job before I got my new one. But yeah, it's just so comforting to know that you always have an option if you have a spouse. And life is so much easier if you are not facing it alone. My husband could attest to this because he was a MGTOW monk for decades. But of course, it is also an absolute nightmare if you are married to the wrong person. That's why you really have to take your time. You really have to get to know the person that you're gonna spend the rest of your life with, because marriage is a sacred vow. That contract is not just between you and your spouse. You made a promise to the Lord. As a Christian, I don't condone annulment or divorce. If you are in a predicament of being married to someone who is just making your life miserable, you made your bed, sleep in it. Instead of ending the marriage because you are suddenly being inconvenient or because she does not meet your expectations, work with her or work with your spouse to resolve the issues. Do not go to the safer route of like, oh, I'm just gonna end the marriage because she's this and that. Just, just a little inconvenience here and there, and it's like, oh, suddenly this marriage is no longer worth it. No. And yeah, going back, marriage is still worth it, especially because biologically, as human beings, we are not designed to go life alone. Well, other people might say, oh, so there you go, Arlene. I'll just have to spin plates and change the flavor every month or so. But where's the fulfillment on that? What's the meaning? What's the meaning of your existence? I know it could be difficult or it could take you a long time to find that right person, but you have to take your time. Because guess what? Nothing worth having comes easy. And I'm so glad that I waited and saved myself for that right person. There have been a lot of people who ridiculed me for not getting into a relationship at the age of 25. Like for them, that was already too old. But I did not listen to them, and I'm glad I did not. I'm glad that I did not rush to getting married. Anyway, guys, that's it for today's video. Let me know what you think in the comment section. And if you want to listen to my conversation with my husband regarding the topic about marriage, if it's still worth it, check out this video. And if you want to hear more of my experiences here in America as a Filipina, check out this playlist. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for your support, and I hope to see you next time. Have a great day.